If you have your Bibles, will you open in the Gospel of Mark? It's the second book in the New Testament, chapter 6. It is page 933 on the Bible on the pews. If you are visiting us, and if you don't own a Bible, take this. This is a gift for you. And if you are visiting us, I'm glad you are here with us today. So Mark chapter 6. We're going to read from verse 30 to 44. And my translation says this: The apostles returned to Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. And he said to them, "Come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in the boat to a desolate place by themselves. Now many saw them going and recognized them, and they ran there on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. And when it grew late, his disciples came to him and said, "This is a desolate place, and the hour is now late. Send them away to go into the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat." But he answered them, "You give them something to eat." And they said to him, "Shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it them to eat?" And he said to them, "How many loaves do you have? Go and see." And when they had found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then he commanded them all to sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups by hundreds and by 50s, and taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing, and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples to set before the people. And he divided the 2 fish among them all. And they all ate and were satisfied. And they took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces and of the fish. And those who ate the loaves were 5,000 men. We started last week after Easter. Pastor Clinton started a new series called The Fellowship of Jesus, together by, in, and for Christ. So the question that we are trying to answer, that we are aiming to answer with this series is, if Jesus is alive, and he is, if Jesus ascended to heaven as he has, and if Jesus has called us, how we should live our lives. How should we respond to this miracle of Jesus' resurrection? How should we respond to the work of redemption and salvation that he provided for us? So Pastor Clinton introduced this series by reminding us that we were called. We were called by Jesus. We were called to belong to him. We were called to be in fellowship with him. And we were called to belong to each other. And Jesus called us to live for his purposes. Let me say something to you. I don't know how much aware you are of what is happening in the world these days. All I can say is this: when I look in the world, when I see what is going on in the world, all I can think about is this: we see people scattered, living for themselves, living for their own purposes, living for their own desires and their own passions. And this is just a testament that when we forsake Jesus Christ, we will not have a purpose for life. The reason the world is upside down the way it is because people forsook Christ and decided to make their own lives, their own purposes according to their own wills. And let me remind you this, if you are here today. I don't know what moves you, what makes you get up in the morning and say, I'm going to live my life for this. I don't know what it is, but if you are here and you are struggling to figure it out, what is my life for, what am I here for, let me tell you this. Unless you come to Jesus and surrender to His purposes, you're going to be spinning your wheels your whole life to come to the end of your life and say, I've wasted. Jesus gives us a purpose. So much so that the Westminster Catechism summarizes what the Bible tells us about what our purpose is. It says this, that man's chief and highest end is to glorify God and fully enjoy Him forever. This is our purpose. So if we are a Christian, and if we believe and we surrender, and if we gave our lives to Jesus, the question that we want to answer is, how do we live our lives to glorify Christ? How do we live our lives to glorify Christ? And that's the kind of a question that Jesus spent 3 years walking with His disciples, training them, teaching them, because Jesus didn't want them to live, by themselves and stay by themselves after Jesus ascended to heaven. So Jesus calls us to Him, and Jesus trains us on how we should live for His glory. And that's what we're going to see today. We're going to see today, the message of today is trained. Is trained. How does Jesus train us? So, there is no better passage in Scripture than this famous one. That if you grew up in church, if you have any knowledge of Christianity, if you have any knowledge of the Bible, this is a very famous passage that you probably learned as a kid, and you know this. But let me tell this passage is way more. It's much deeper than simply providing for a multitude of people. Jesus is training His disciples here. But let me say this to you. Nobody get up in the morning, put your dress pants, your dress shoes, and then you head to the gym. Nobody gets to the gym and pick up whatever equipment you have there and starting working out. You have a plan. You put proper clothes. You get there, you have an idea, you have a plan. How are you going to do and what are you going to do? What kind of a training is necessary and so on. So this is what we see here. The Gospel of Mark is a very fast-paced gospel. Mark has one purpose, to reveal who Jesus Christ is and what His mission is all about. And he goes in a fast-paced mode here, getting to the point. So everything, every detail, every event is full-packed for that purpose. And when we see here this event in Mark chapter 6, we have to look in the whole chapter, the whole context, to really see what is happening. And we see that the whole context here, Jesus is setting the tone for the training. Jesus is preparing for the training. The disciples had no idea what was happening. Jesus did. And for us to understand this event, this beautiful, fabulous event, we need to understand the context here. So let us quickly look very quickly here in Mark chapter 6, what is happening here. The first thing that we see in the Gospel of Mark in the chapter 6 is this, that Jesus, after He calls His disciples, He goes back to Nazareth. Jesus goes back to Nazareth with His disciples, to His family, to His friends, to His community, to His church. And guess what? He gets there, nobody believes Him. People said, is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary, and brother of James, and Joseph, and Judas, and Simon? And are not his sister here with us? And they took offense at Him. They didn't believe Jesus. Can you imagine if you are the disciples and you are with Jesus in those circumstances and His peers, His friends, His family don't believe Him? Can you imagine how you as a disciple would be feeling maybe? I don't know. And in addition to that, there is also a circumstance here that the chapter 6 reveals to us here that we need to understand. After Jesus leaves Nazareth, He calls His disciples and He sends them to fulfill and to do his mission. He said, and he called the 12 and began to send them out 2 by 2. So they went out and proclaimed that people should repent. So basically, our passage is started by the disciples returning. We saw that. But in between Jesus sending the disciples and the disciples returning to Jesus, there is this kind of a bracketed, out of place, kind of a narrative about the death of John the Baptist. And that's a very interesting moment here, because I believe this is to reveal us a few things here. So in addition of people doubting Jesus, not believing in Jesus, in addition of Jesus involving his disciples in his mission, we see here that Jesus and his disciples, they are grieving and they are tired. So Mark inserts this portion here in the text for us to understand what is happening with Jesus, his emotions, how he's feeling, his disciples. There is more to it than which we will see. But it says, King Herod heard of it, for Jesus' name had become known. Some said, John the Baptist has been raised from the dead. That is why these miraculous powers are at work in him. But others said, he is Elijah. And others said, he's a prophet, like one of the prophets of old. So people are confused. People don't know who Jesus is. Some people saying that Jesus is John the Baptist reincarnated. Can you imagine? Picture yourself as a disciple walking with Jesus under those circumstances. And then our passage, pick it up in verse 30, and it says, and the apostles returned to Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. And he said to them, come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while, for many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in the boat to a desolate place by themselves. One thing that is clear for us that we can draw immediately from here is this. It was very clear to the disciples who was the owner of the mission, to whom they should give an account to whom they were following and obeying, and they need to give an account for everything that they were doing. It was Jesus. So that's what they do. And we see here that the disciples have worked so hard. I can see them working so much. There is no end of the multitude coming that have no time to eat. And then something unexpected takes place here. Now, many saw them going and recognized them, and they ran there on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. So the disciples didn't expect it. They were thinking that they were going away and spending this perfect retreat, kumbaya time with Jesus, and all of a sudden, the crowd, the multitude show up and interrupt that. That is the setting for the training that Jesus is going to train them. It's going to blow their minds. It's going to be memorable that they will never forget this moment. And the first lesson that Jesus draw their attention to understand is that compassion takes priority over personal comfort. Think about this for a second here. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd, and he began to teach them many things. You get the picture. They're tired. Jesus, let us retreat. Let us be by ourselves. Let us enjoy this fellowship with Jesus. Let us enjoy this time of camaraderie and friendship and all niceness. And let just be us. They get there. The crowd shows up. What is Jesus' response? Compassion. Jesus' response is compassion. And this is what I found very fascinating in this fact here, in this moment here with Jesus and his disciples. Because our tendency, if we are honest, our tendency is to just withdraw ourselves, just to pull away, just to retreat, just to think about what we need. They were tired. They wanted to be comfortable. But Jesus had compassion on the crowd. But Jesus also had compassion on them. Think about this for a moment. The passage says that Jesus saw a great crowd and had compassion on them, and then he began to teach them many things. Jesus knew that the disciples were tired, they were exhausted. Jesus let them rest while being with him, staying with him, and Jesus did the teaching. We don't know how long was it, but it was long enough that he got late. So let me bring this for our lives today here. Jesus knows our needs. Jesus knows where we are, the circumstances we are, the moments we are living. He knows our longings and our hearts. But Jesus challenges us to see that his compassion is greater than our comfort. But let me put it this way. The question here, and is always the question is, what is the reason for us to pull away? If this is our tendency, if we want to rest, if we want to comfort, if you just want that, what is the reason for it? What is the motivation in our hearts for that? Is the motivation in our hearts to be with Jesus, to be recharged in Jesus? And if we are honest, I can say, even for myself, that's not usually the case. Usually the case why we withdraw ourselves is because we don't want it. Is because we are selfish. Is because we rationalize ways and means to justify our comfort. And I'm not saying that every rest is wrong. What I'm saying is, what is the motivation of our hearts? What are we doing? And let me say this, Jesus cares for the crowd, and Jesus cares for you. Don't you believe that Jesus can take care both of the crowd and you without excluding each other? So whenever you feel the urge, whenever you feel the tendency, I need to withdraw for whatever reason, that is not a legitimate reason, let me challenge you and ask you this. Trust Jesus, that he cares for you, not in detriment of the crowd. And he cares for the crowd, not in detriment of you. And Jesus can take care of both, as he did. The second lesson that Jesus teaches us here, it's a very important lesson, especially for us, I believe, in our North American culture and context. Jesus teaches us that awareness of our helplessness takes priority over pragmatic strategies. So think about this way. The passage says that when it grew late, his disciples came to him and said, "This is a desolate place, and the hour is now late. Send them away to go into the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat." When we read this account, what the disciples are proposing is actually reasonable, isn't it? From a human logical, pragmatic perspective, it's reasonable. It's logical. It's rational. There's nothing wrong with that, per se. But they are missing out on something crucial here that we need to understand. How often, and this is for us here, how often in our everyday life, when we are facing an impossibility, when we are facing a situation that seems impossible to solve, our first reaction is to draw in our own resources, to draw in our own wisdom, to draw in our own ways, to draw in our logic and our reason and our pragmatics to get it done. Instead of coming to Jesus. Think about this way. Jesus called us to be with Him. We believe that we have the life of Jesus in us, flowing through us. The Bible talks about that the Christian is united with Christ. It is no longer you who live, but it is Christ who lives in you. Jesus is living His life in you and through you. In other words, those are opportunities that we can engage with Jesus and live those moments, live those opportunities, embrace those opportunities to experience all of Jesus, who is far wiser than we are, who is more resourceful than we are, whom nothing is impossible for Him to do. And He wants us to tap into that with Him, in partnership with Him. And how often we miss out because we default in our manners, of relying on our own ways, in our traditions, in what we know, but we've always done this way. This is what we do. This is how we should respond. How often we do that. And we see that our ways, and the other thing is this. We need to see these opportunities as opportunities to be confronted with our sinful nature. And let me tell why this is important. Our tendency, if our tendency is to see the pragmatics and the logistical problems, when Jesus says opportunities to have compassion, it has to do with our hearts. It has to do with our sinful hearts. Sin did a far worse job than we think. Sin broke us in such a way that we can no longer see life and reality through the eyes of Jesus, the way that God sees things. Sin caused us to turn to ourselves and no longer see the way that God sees reality. And these opportunities, when we are faced in an impossibility like this, is an opportunity for us to step back and look at Jesus and see how He sees those opportunities. The disciples saw the crowd as an annoyance, as a disruption to their comfort, as a disruption to their group, as a disruption to what they know and what they love and what they treasure. And Jesus sees the crowd as an opportunity to show grace and compassion and love them. And Jesus is teaching them to put away their pragmatics and to trust Him and to tap on Him, on His resources for what He can accomplish that is beyond what we can think. And then there is a third lesson for us here. Jesus' strategy includes availability, obedience, and faithfulness. So, after Jesus challenges us to think about our comfort from His perspective, to know that He cares for us more than we can even consider, that He is able and willing to take care of us, not in detriment of the mission, not in detriment of showing his compassion. If Jesus is showing us that our tendency is to rely on ourselves first and foremost instead of relying on him, who can do infinitely more than we can think, Jesus is also showing us here that his strategy in training us involves availability, obedience, and faithfulness. Look at what he says in verse 38. And he said to them, "How many loaves do you have? Go and see." And when they had found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then he commanded them all to sit down in groups on green grass. So they sat down in groups by hundreds and by 50s. You see, Jesus is showing us what he is training his disciples in his way. His ways are availability. He called the disciples and said, "You go and you check. You go and find out what do you have in your hands. What are the resources that you have? Don't think how impossible this is. What do you have that you can bring to me?" And the disciples, they go. I was thinking about, maybe the disciples were like, "Man, Jesus is really out to lunch here. How crazy that is. Spending 200 denarii, that is worth like 8 months worth of work of a person to feed this crowd. What about us?" Well, but maybe I'll go. He's telling us to go, I'll go. They made themselves available to go and see and think about at that moment. They are mingling with the crowd. They are rubbing shoulders with the crowd. They are seeing their needs. They are seeing who they are. They are feeling their pain. They know who they are. They're not just distant. They are embedded in the midst of the crowd. They know what it is to be hungry. They know what it is to be far from their place. And they come back with 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And Jesus commands them. Think about our culture. The disciples were available. But think about our ways, our culture. We live in a culture right now that is so focused on self-pleasure. It's so focused on self-fulfillment. It's so focused on the self so much that the slogan goes, "You do you." And sometimes, even we Christians, we rationalize this by saying, the Bible says that we should love our neighbors as we love ourselves. And let me tell you this, that's not what the passage is saying. Because in John 13, Jesus actually will say what that passage means when he said that you shall love your neighbor as I have loved you. And how has Jesus loved you? With compassion and sacrifice of his own life. As we tend to remove ourselves and make ourselves unavailable, and again, it's all about the heart. What are the reasons for us to be available and not available? I'm not saying that you have to say yes for every single thing. And I'm not saying that you should say no either. What is the motivation in your heart? Why are you saying yes? Are you saying yes because of pride? Are you saying yes because you want to get brownie points with God? Are you saying no for selfish reasons? I love how David Livingstone, a missionary to Africa, a Scottish missionary to Africa, that he said this, "I've never made a sacrifice for Christ." And this is a man who's been through a lot of things in Africa. Why? Because his heart was full of gratitude. His heart knew who Jesus is. He was full of gratitude for him. So in our culture, when the culture says that you should care of yourself, think of yourself, put yourself first. The result of the culture is simply this: you do what you want. And the disciples obeyed Jesus. The disciples didn't do what they want. They obeyed Jesus. And they said, well, I don't know what's going to happen here, but they put the crowd to sit in groups. Have no idea what's going to happen. But they obeyed. They obeyed. And we see that their obedience is because they trusted who Jesus is. They might be shaky, but they obeyed. And then their availability and obedience were also expressed in their faithfulness. Look at what it says, verse 41. And taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples to set before the people. And he divided 2 fish among them all, and they all ate and were satisfied. And they took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces and of the fish. I love this moment of the story here. 12 baskets and 12 disciples. Do you think that is a coincidence? It's not. Every Jew that was worth its salt would carry his own basket. Why? Because Jews, they had food restrictions. They had eating restrictions. They would never leave their house without a snack. But when the day was gone, the snack was long gone. So the disciples, they have their own baskets. So Jesus filled their baskets. Now, let's think logically and practically here for a second. If you have a basket full of fish and bread, what are the options for you? Think about a basket full. Are you going to be able to eat it all very quickly? If you don't eat, what's going to happen to the food? It's going to spoil and goes to waste. The disciples, they captured and understood the message that Jesus was using them. Jesus used them in the miracle to the point that they would continue after the miracle. The disciples probably, they took those baskets and they continue sharing those baskets with people along the way. So much so that that region, I don't know if you know about this region. This is in the northwest corner of the Sea of Galilee. In this region, there is today a church that was established probably in the 3rd or 4th century. And this church is called the Church of Multiplication. And it has this mosaic of the 2 fishes and the 5 loaves. All I know is this: the faithfulness of the disciples led to an impact in that region. Led to an impact in that region for centuries later. And there is another interesting fact here that I don't know if you know this. This region, the northwest corner of the Sea of Galilee, usually outside of the cities, it's where the zealots, they were like a political party, if you will. They were a group of people committed to restore Israel, to restore the glory of Israel, the kingdom of Israel, and to get rid of the Roman Empire, get rid of the Romans that were dominating the region. And here we see that the way that Jesus fulfilled his mission is not through power, is not through strength, is not through alliances, is not through political means, is not through any of that. It's through the faithfulness of his people and his disciples who go and share their love and share their compassion and share the gospel with people who turn their lives to Jesus and find new purpose for living. That a church was established in that region, in the kind of a headquarters of the Zealots. And we live, as I said before, such a moment in time, in history, in our culture, in our country, and in the world. If there is a time that we need to be faithful and bring the compassion and bring the gospel of Jesus Christ to everyone around us so they can find a purpose and a reason for living, is now. It's not going to be through major alliances and political strategies. That's not Jesus' way. And here we have a summary of this dynamic of the training of Jesus. I want you to kind of follow with me for a second here. Think about this way. Jesus, He puts us and the disciples before an impossibility. Jesus tells them, you give them something to eat. And the disciples, they are tempted on themselves to solve it by themselves in their own way, because they say, shall we buy food? And Jesus asked His disciples to make themselves available, to simply go and check, what do you have at hand? What resources do you have? Great, small, it doesn't matter. What do you have? And the disciples obeyed Jesus and brought whatever resources they had, 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And Jesus tells the disciples to sit down and prepare to eat, which they obeyed, and they did. And then Jesus performs this miracle. Did you notice in the passage that it was not Jesus who actually gave the pieces of bread to the crowd, but it was the disciples? I can picture the image of the disciples walking in the midst of the crowd with the baskets, and as they pull the fish and the bread out of the baskets, it doesn't end. It doesn't end. The point that Jesus is making is that Jesus will do His miracle, but He's going to use you and I in the process. Jesus involves you and I in the process of the miracle. We are His instruments in the hand of our Redeemer. And then, to conclude and to finish, what was the result? What was the result? I don't know if you know this, but there are only 2 miracles that are recorded in all of the Gospels. In all of the Gospels. The first miracle that is recorded in all of the Gospels is the resurrection of Jesus. And the second miracle is this event. Is the multiplication of the bread that are recorded in all the 4 Gospels. I believe that the disciples, the apostles, they knew how important this event that took place was. And it was more than simply providing for their physical needs. Remember chapter 6, the context that we are talking about? That people are confused. They are in doubt who Jesus is. Is Jesus John the Baptist? Is Jesus Elijah? Is Jesus just like another great prophet? Who is this Jesus? And here, the disciples got to see firsthand who Jesus is. And not only that, have you considered that it was the disciples' obedience to Jesus when Jesus sent them to go to the crowds that brought the crowds to see Jesus? I don't know why the disciples were surprised when the crowd showed up. They went, they proclaimed, they preached, and guess what? It worked. It worked. They came. They came to see who Jesus is. And look, how does Jesus do this miracle? Let's read it again. Verse 41. And taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples to set before the people. Jesus did the miracle on his own accord. Jesus didn't go and said, "Thus saith the Lord, may the bread multiply." That's what the prophets would say. That's what Elijah would say. Jesus said, "Father, thank you." And he started splitting. Isn't that amazing? That only a God could do that. Only God, the creator of all things, that can take something out of nothing and create something. Only God could do that. Let there be light. Light. Think about how Jesus is also greater than Moses. Moses provided the manna for the people in the desert. Try to connect all these images with the people and the crowd there. People knew their story. They knew their prophets. They knew that Moses was the greatest prophet they had, who had given them manna in the desert. Jesus is in the desert with his people. Jesus is in the desert with this crowd, and he says, "I am the bread of life." I'm not the only one who provides for your physical needs, but the physical needs are signs of a greater reality of our spiritual need, that we need the bread of Jesus to truly satisfy us. And the passage says that they were satisfied. What a picture and what a sign. And you know what a sign is? That's why the New Testament, they call miracles signs, because a sign is something that points to something more important. You don't see a sign on Deerfoot for the airport and you stop at the sign. You go to the airport. This is pointing to Jesus, to his greatness, to who he is, the Son of God, the Messiah, the one that is the creator and sustainer of everything, who came to redeem us, to deliver us from ourselves, to deliver us from our ways, and to give us a new life, that we no longer live for ourselves, but we live for the one who has redeemed us, for his purposes and his ways. Did you notice in the detail in the Gospel of Mark that he says that they sat on green grass? I love how Mark got on those details. It was probably got that from Peter, who was there. Jesus is saying, "I am the true and greater shepherd." Psalm 23 says what? That he makes me what? Lay down in green pastures. Jesus is saying, "I am the greater shepherd. And if you come to me, I will lead you into a banquet." Isn't that what Psalm 23 says? What does Jesus did provide? A banquet. And Jesus is saying, there is a bigger one coming in the end. There's a bigger one coming in the end, and I want you to come and participate with me. But guess what? You're not going to get there by yourself. If you're not living this life with me, why should you live the next life with me? So, let's summarize for us to finish here. In Jesus' training dynamics, we learn that compassion takes priority over personal comfort. Don't pull away for selfish reasons. Trust Jesus' care for you and for his mission at the same time. awareness of our helplessness takes priority over pragmatic strategy. We are united with Christ. He lives in and through us. Our limitations are often opportunities to check our hearts, our motivations, our self-reliance and autonomy, and to learn to see life through Jesus' eyes and His ways, to show compassion and grace. And Jesus' strategy includes availability, obedience, and faithfulness. We live in a culture centered around self. To live with Jesus, be engaged in His mission, implies making ourselves available when we don't want to trust and obey Jesus when it's hard, to obey His word and His ways when we are compelled to do our own ways, and to bring faithful to Him everything that we have, knowing that He will do the miracle. He will create the impact through us. A couple things for us to consider so we can finish. Am I truly engaged in the mission of Jesus, or have I become more of a spectator? Am I obeying what Jesus has already made clear, or waiting to grow without obeying what He has already told us? Do you see how incoherent that is? If your personal trainer tells you to do this many series to work out, and you don't do it, how can you expect to have an impact, an effect? How do you expect to hear from Jesus if you are not doing what He has already told you to do? And more, the last one, do I treasure Jesus Himself more than anything, or do I mostly come to Him for what I want from Him? Let me tell you this, brothers and sisters and friends, Jesus is not a means to an end. Jesus is the end. Why do we come to Jesus? Have we come to the end of our senses, to the end of ourselves, to the realization that I need Him more than anything He can give me? I want to finish with this video. You guys probably have been aware of the Artemis 2. 4 astronauts for the last 3 weeks orbiting around the moon. And I want to show you this video from the captain of the crew. This is what he said. And we will pray and we'll finish.
Hi, Kristen Fisher with The Endless Void, and welcome home. It's been such a joy watching how much this mission has gotten people so excited about space. My question's a little bit deep, so bear with me. When Apollo 14 astronaut Edgar Mitchell was returning from the moon, he had an experience so profound that when he returned to Earth, he devoted the rest of his life to studying the nature of human consciousness. And it's a theme that all 4 of you touched on to varying degrees at some point during the mission. And so my question is, now that you've been back on Earth for just a few days and had a little bit of time to sit with it, do any of you feel as though you had an experience similar to what Mitchell described, this sense of universal connectedness? And did you experience somehow a shift in consciousness somehow? Thanks.
Yes. Chris, it's a great question. I'll just the only thing I can do is just share one quick story when I got back on the ship. I'm not really a religious person, but there was just no other avenue for me to explain anything or to experience anything. So I asked for the chaplain on the Navy ship to just come visit us for a minute. And when that man walked in, I'd never met him before in my life, but I saw the cross on his collar, and I broke down in tears. It's very hard to fully grasp what we just went through. And in these short, you just said it's been a week since we've been back, but it's been a week of medical testing, physical testing, doctors, science objectives. We have not had that decompression. We have not had that reflection time. So I'm basing this on what we saw. And when the sun eclipsed behind the moon, I think all four of us, I turned to Victor and I said, I don't think humanity has evolved to the point of being able to comprehend what we are looking at right now, because it was otherworldly and it was amazing.
Hi, Kristen Fisher with The Endless Void. And
I love this video because this man, he had an opportunity that very few people in this world has, to go to space, to see the moon and the earth from a vantage point that none of us realistically, I hope maybe our children or grandchildren maybe one day, but we won't. And when he saw the vastness, the beauty of the universe, when he saw what creation that God has made, when he saw that, he had no category to put that in. He had no way to process that. To the point that when he came to the ship, he called the chaplain, and when he saw the cross in the lapel of the chaplain, he started crying. Brothers and sisters, let me say this to you. Put yourself in that event when Jesus did that miracle. That Jesus is the same Jesus today. And when we see that Jesus, how glorious Jesus is, the Son of God, God Himself, amazing, fabulous miracle. When you see who He is, when you see His beauty and His glory, the way that He has showed, you have two options to answer for that. You either will answer like the astronaut, trying to find a category to put that in, to rationalize and make sense of your life. Or you're going to fall on His knees, and you're going to be in awe of Him, and you're going to worship Him, and you're going to surrender to Him, and you're going to give your life to Him. And you're going to say, I'm done. Jesus, you are who you say you are. Take it over. I'm done. And if you are a Christian and you are in that moment, that you presence, that you see, that you witness that miracle, all that does to you and I, brothers and sisters, is this. It boasts our confidence in who Jesus is. That the same Jesus that fulfilled His mission that day is the same Jesus that will be with us and help us fulfill His mission today. We have full confidence in who He is, that we can trust and rely. These are the options. Shall we pray?